Well, welcome to episode 43. Thank you for joining me today. Today we're fortunate to have with us Ken Wolski. He's the executive director of the Coalition for Medical Marijuana in New Jersey. We're going to have a lively discussion concerning marijuana, both medical and recreational. So we're looking forward to a good show. Ken, thank you for being here with us.
Well, thanks for having me here, Peter.
And before we get into everything, I just want to thank our sponsor, Trigger Smart. They are the makers of patented child-proof smart guns, and if you'd like to learn more about them and their products, you can go to Trigger Smart. That's TRIGGERSMART.com. So thank you to our sponsor. All right, so we're going to talk about marijuana, both medical and recreational. And before we get into the questions, Ken, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background and how you became involved in the Coalition for Medical Marijuana.
Well, thank you, Peter. My background is I'm a registered nurse. I've been an RN in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania since 1976. So I have a wide variety of clinical experiences. And in 1993, I went to a conference in Amsterdam about medical marijuana. There were no conferences in the United States at the time on medical marijuana. And I met there a gentleman by the name of James Burton. And Mr. Burton was an American who had just been released from an American prison after spending a year in prison. And his crime was growing marijuana. And he was doing it because he had glaucoma and no medicine was helping him to stop from going blind. He tried marijuana for the first time in his 30s, and he noticed an almost immediate improvement in his vision. So he talked to his ophthalmologist about that, and his ophthalmologist recommended that he continue using the marijuana. And he was growing it on his farm. He got busted. He was convicted of a marijuana offense, and he spent a year in prison, despite the fact that his ophthalmologist testified at his trial. And while he was in prison, the government confiscated his home and his farm for growing that marijuana there, Peter. So, to me, this was one of the worst cases of social injustice that I had ever encountered, and I determined to look into it and try to stop it from happening in the United States. So I researched the issue for about almost 10 years, and I took my research to the New Jersey State Nurses Association and asked them to endorse medical marijuana in 2002, and they did after studying the issue. And with that endorsement, I co-founded the Coalition for Medical Marijuana in New Jersey in 2003. So we have this nonprofit educational organization. It's a 501c3 organization. And our mission is to educate the public about the benefits of marijuana. And so we've been doing that for over a decade now. And that's how I got involved in it, Peter.
All right. Let's talk about medical marijuana itself and its legalization in New Jersey. Because the way that I understand the law, and certainly you are more of an expert in this than I am, but the way I understand the law, there are very limited conditions for which you can obtain a medical marijuana card, which would then allow you to purchase the medical marijuana. And those conditions are very serious, like terminal cancer, MS, inflammatory bowel disease or Crohn's disease, terminal illness, glaucoma, seizure disorders, cancer. I mean, things that are life-ending or very life-altering conditions. There's not, from my understanding of it, the ability to go in and say, hey, look, I got a really bad backache and I need some medical marijuana. Is that your position, your understanding of this?
Yes, absolutely. The New Jersey's conditions are considered the most restrictive of any of the 20 states and the District of Columbia that have medical marijuana laws. And as you say, it's only available for desperately ill patients in New Jersey. Chronic pain is a qualifying condition along with nausea and vomiting and the wasting syndrome, but only if they're related to a diagnosis of cancer and AIDS. So chronic pain is probably the reason that most people use marijuana throughout the country. It's effective for chronic pain. It results in a decrease in the use of opioids and even non-prescription pain relievers. For example, acetaminophen, the main ingredient in Tylenol, an over-the-counter pain reliever, is the leading cause of liver failure in the United States. So there are compelling reasons to use it for, conditions such as a backache, or something that a doctor that you would, I've had a backache in my life, and they can be quite debilitating. But chronic pain is basically the conditions that qualify for marijuana therapy are arbitrarily limited in New Jersey, Peter. Chronic pain was originally, for any reason, it was going to be a qualifying condition in New Jersey, but then it was taken out of the bill at the last minute, and like I said, it was only chronic pain for cancer and AIDS now. So it is a very limited bill in terms of what conditions qualify. Now, the Department of Health is empowered to add qualifying conditions at any time. For example, the neurological conditions that qualify are only three: multiple sclerosis, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and muscular dystrophy. But there are a number of neurological conditions that marijuana can benefit. It's just an arbitrary distinction to limit it to three. It can help with Parkinsonian's disease. It can help with Friedreich's ataxia and a number of other conditions. So, we hope to have the bill expanded to its, full capacity, or the law expanded to its full capacity, really, and so that, all the people who can benefit from marijuana therapy would be eligible in New Jersey.
All right, I want to touch on some of the things that you've raised here, but before we do that, I just want to give some baseline information for those people. Everyone knows what marijuana is, but there are a lot of people out there who have never used marijuana, don't understand it, don't understand how it's administered from a medical standpoint and what its effect is on the body. So let's just step back and go through the basics of marijuana. I think that when most people think of it, they're thinking of, Harold and Kumar going to White Castle. That's the extent of their marijuana knowledge. So, going back to the 60s and 70s as a purely recreational drug, first of all, what is marijuana? How do people administer it? Not just in the medical sense, but in a general sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, the marijuana is a plant. The cannabis sativa is the Latin name for it. It's been used as a medicine and throughout history. There are thousands of years of its use. As a matter of fact, marijuana under the name cannabis was included in the U.S. pharmacopoeia for about 100 years before it was removed in the 1940s. It was included in about 100 different preparations through pharmaceutical companies in the United States before it was banned by the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937. So it's a very useful drug for many medical reasons, and most people think that you only smoke marijuana, but that's only one of the methods of drug delivery. Now there are an incredible variety of ways to consume marijuana. It can be vaporized, that is to say, inhaled with no smoke at all. It can be sprayed under the tongue and absorbed under the tongue. It can be eaten in a variety of products. It can be drank in a number of products. It can even be applied to the skin, and it can be used as a suppository. I mean, there are just so many different ways to use marijuana now that its medical use is being accepted in the United States. But the effects of it, basically, it's a euphoriant. It's misclassified as a narcotic. Its main purpose is not to put you to sleep, but its main purpose causes a state of euphoria, temporary and self-limiting, and does not associated with any type of hangover afterwards. But the effects are mitigated by the type of marijuana that's being used. There's, it's quite sophisticated what the growers are doing now. They can grow marijuana to enhance various aspects of the components of marijuana, the cannabinoids. So if they want a product that is primarily associated with getting people high. They can grow high THC content marijuana, and if they're concerned with, for example, controlling seizures, they can grow a high CBD or cannabidiol type of marijuana. And of course, it depends on how much is taken, and there are various effects on the body, both expected effects, side effects, and adverse effects.
Okay. All right. So my understanding is that back in the 60s, 70s, when people were utilizing marijuana, even for just straight-out recreational purposes, the levels of THC were somewhere around 5, 6, 7%. And now when you look at some of the levels in the medical marijuana, you're up 15 to 30%. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I think that's generally true. I think that it's safe to say that the THC content has probably doubled. The average THC content has probably doubled between the 60s and now. But there are a couple of caveats that go with that. One is that, even back in the 60s, there was extremely high THC content marijuana available. There was marijuana it wasn't necessarily the homegrown marijuana from the United States. It was imported from Jamaica or from Mexico or from Colombia especially, or from Thailand with Thai sticks. And there was a great deal of hashish that was available in the 60s. So this hashish actually had a THC content that rivals any of the THC content that's available in today's marijuana. So these are some of the things that are not taken into consideration when you say that there was just a greatly stronger product that's available now than was available back in the 60s.
All right, now what do you attribute the shift in, I guess, the 40s and 50s when marijuana was looked at as not a medical drug and it was banned? It was in most states, if not all of them, considered to be illegal. What do you think has happened? How is it that over time, because, the federal law still says that marijuana is illegal. But
yes,
you have individual states now sort of going back on the original decision to ban it as a medical substance or any other sort of substance, and now saying, well, wait a minute, there's some benefit to it. What's going on at the state level? What's going on? Why are people saying, hey, look, there's medical benefit to this?
It's basically a recognition that marijuana was misclassified as a Schedule I drug, for one thing, back in 1970 when the Controlled Substances Act was passed. Marijuana was always recognized as a medicine, Peter. Like I said, for 100 years, it was accepted as a pharmaceutical agent right here in the United States. It really was accepted as a medicine longer than it's been banned as a medicine. And in 1937 there was a campaign of misinformation, really, from the federal government about the dangers of marijuana. Even the AMA was opposed to banning it. They said that by banning marijuana, you're going to remove this therapeutic agent from so many people that it's just not proper. But Congress went ahead and banned it anyway in 1937, and then the Marijuana Tax Act was declared unconstitutional in 1969, and in 1970 Congress passed the Controlled Substances Act, which, like I said, put marijuana as a Schedule I drug, and which means that it has no accepted medical uses in the United States, and that it's unsafe for use even under medical supervision, and that it has a high potential for abuse. Well, this was contrary to the experiences of so many people, and to research that was not only done in the United States before the ban, but is being carried out in foreign countries. So the evidence for marijuana's usefulness did not go away when the federal government declared that there were no accepted medical uses for marijuana. So, but the federal government has been quite intransigent on this. They refuse to consider it even despite the fact that the Schaefer Commission, for example, who was appointed by President Nixon to investigate whether or not marijuana was properly classified, they said marijuana was not properly classified as a Schedule I drug, that it should be decriminalized for adult use in the United States. And later on, when the Schaefer Commission looked at this, later on when it was appealed to the federal government that marijuana should be reclassified, and Judge Francis Young examined the issue for 2 years, he wound up saying that marijuana was the safest therapeutically active substance known to man, and that it shouldn't be classified as a Schedule I drug. But it was, and it still is to this day. Marijuana is considered a Schedule I drug by the federal government. And so these state laws have been ways to get around this federal prohibition. So the first state law was passed in 1996 in California, the first working medical marijuana law, the Compassionate Use Act, Proposition 215. And part of the reason that got so much support was there were so many AIDS patients who were dying in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1980s and early 90s, and there was no medicine to help them. But people began to realize that the AIDS patients who were using marijuana were fighting off the wasting syndrome that was killing the AIDS patients, and they were living longer than the AIDS patients who were not using marijuana. So, it just became quite clear that there was enormous therapeutic benefits, the life-saving benefits in some cases, to marijuana therapy, and that people should be using this for their health and to protect their lives. And it was quite well known that marijuana helped with glaucoma and with the nausea and vomiting that was associated with chemotherapy. So the health benefits of marijuana are well recognized in the medical community and among patients, and these laws are an attempt. These state laws that we have now, 20 states passed medical marijuana laws in New Jersey. These are an attempt to get around the federal prohibition against marijuana.
Well, you said that it's accepted in the medical community, but there's a lot of people out there in the medical community who will dispute that. People who will say that there's not enough scientific testing to really support all of these claims. I mean, the fact is that it's a drug that is euphoric, as you described it, and not necessarily curing anything. It doesn't have, to the extent that medical evidence has supported it, it doesn't show that it has some sort of curative feature to it. It seems as though that the medical community is really split. I mean, you have to have come up against these people just based upon what you're doing. The people who will say it's not safe, there's no scientific support of this, there's no scientific support that it's going to benefit various conditions. Sure, it helps relieve pain and that sort of thing, but it's not something that we should be using. What do you think about that?
Well, yes, I didn't mean to imply that there was unanimity of agreement in the medical community about the benefits of marijuana by any means, Peter. But certain large there's a great deal of support for marijuana therapy in the medical community, including not only my state nurses association, but state nurses associations in about 20 different states, along with the American Nurses Association. The American College of Physicians has supported medical marijuana. The American Academy of Family Physicians has supported medical marijuana. The American Public Health Association, numerous legitimate medical organizations do support medical marijuana and immediate patient access to medical marijuana. The opponents basically say that there is not enough scientific support, but what you run up against is the type of scientific support that they're looking for is the scientific support that is included in FDA trials. Now, and FDA approval of marijuana, that's the main stumbling block here in America, and why the opponents of medical marijuana can insist that there's not enough scientific proof. But the reality is that the federal government has been blocking the type of clinical studies that would lead to FDA approval. FDA approval entails clinical trials, small clinical trials leading to larger clinical trials. Now, some of the smaller clinical trials have been done that clearly have the gold standard of scientific proof of marijuana's safety and efficacy for a number of different conditions. You would think that when these smaller clinical trials would have been successfully completed, that they would lead to larger clinical trials and FDA approval. But as I said, the federal government continues to block the large clinical trials involving 1,000 patients or more. And they continue to block these trials even to this day. The only marijuana that is available for these federally approved large clinical trials is the marijuana that is grown at the University of Mississippi, which is the only federal supply of marijuana. So, and the federal government says that they are not in the business of finding benefits for marijuana. They are in the business of finding harms that are associated with marijuana. So the only trials that they really approve are trials that are associated with finding harms about marijuana.
All right, well, do you think that there's, let me just ask you this, do you think that there is a contradiction in the fact that it is illegal under federal law, it's not being funded to show the benefits of it under federal programs, yet in Colorado, where a lot of tax benefit has been derived, there's no disputing the fact that the federal government will take tax benefits from those states that are selling marijuana. What do you think about that issue? How can you take it on one hand and say, all right, this is great, we're making money, but we're making money on something that's we don't approve? What do you think about that?
Welcome to the Alice in Wonderland world of marijuana and the law. There are so many contradictions about marijuana and the law, Peter, that we could go on for quite a bit just talking about that. For example, did you know that in New Jersey, the law, the Compassionate Use Medical Marijuana Act, says that modern medical research has discovered a beneficial use for marijuana in treating or alleviating the pain or other symptoms associated with certain debilitating medical conditions. This whole law is about the fact that marijuana is useful as a medicine in New Jersey, and yet in New Jersey today, the Attorney General's office denies that there are any medical benefits to marijuana. Marijuana is still considered a Schedule I drug in the state of New Jersey. So here you have the Office of Attorney General saying there are no medical benefits to marijuana, and you have the Department of Health saying, well, here's a program for the medical benefits of marijuana. Some of the contradictions I cannot resolve, trust me, in this when it comes to marijuana therapy in the law. But just one other point I wanted to make about the scientific proof of marijuana safety and efficacy. These programs are all considered compassionate use programs, Peter, in the 20 states that have medical marijuana laws. And compassionate use is a type of program that is designed to get a new or controversial therapy to patients before FDA approval. So FDA approval really shouldn't play any role in these programs or the validity of these programs, because we're taking FDA approval out of it. The kind of science that is required for FDA approval is not required for any compassionate use program.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. All right, we've talked about the benefits here of medical marijuana, but I think that the entire confusion that arises here is based upon one side saying there's no scientific support, the other side saying, well, you don't need the type of scientific support that you're looking for. Nobody is able to, get together and say, all right, well, let's, see what really is going on here. But you're going to have those people that say that it's a Class I drug because it has addictive properties. And most proponents of marijuana tell me, no, that's not true. What do you think about whether or not it's an addictive substance, and that's why it's classified as it is?
Well, for many years, when I was in nursing school and when I was practicing as a nurse in the hospitals and ICUs, the Merck manuals did not recognize marijuana as being an addictive substance. They said that it didn't have the kind of characteristic withdrawal symptoms that other addictive substances had, and that it may have been psychologically addictive because it increased euphoria, increased pleasure associated with various activities and whatnot, and decreased painful memories. But anyway, the federal government did do some studies, and they did determine that there were some characteristic withdrawal symptoms in a small minority of people, like about 9% of the people who use marijuana. And so these withdrawal symptoms can be characterized as a physical addiction. They are...
Well, the DSM-4 lists diagnosis for medical withdrawal, or for marijuana withdrawal.
Right.
So,
and if you look at those, you'll see that they are irritability, some sleep disturbance. Certainly not the kind of withdrawal symptoms that you have associated with alcohol. For example, which can be fatal, the delirium tremens, or the physical agony of withdrawal from heroin, or the psychological problems of withdrawal from nicotine. So I think it's safe to say that there is an addictive quality to marijuana that is experienced by a minority of people, but the withdrawal symptoms are fairly mild. It basically the addictive properties of marijuana, when you compare them to nicotine, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, are about equal to the level of caffeine. Yes, it may be addictive, about as addictive as caffeine is addictive, but, how can this possibly justify the draconian kind of penalties that we have, against the use of marijuana in our society when you're looking at a substance that is about as addictive as caffeine?
All right, well, let's look at that for a second, because obviously the goal with your organization is to promote medical marijuana, but you also are supporting recreational use of marijuana, as we've seen, in Colorado. But I want to talk for a second about, you mentioned the draconian laws, but marijuana, unlike alcohol, for example, marijuana stays in your system. How can you then determine the penalties associated with someone who has used marijuana and is now operating a car? It's not the same test that you'd run if you had somebody with alcohol in their system, because you can get a level that at least lets you know what the penalty should be if you apply it to our legal system. So if you have, whether it's medical or recreational, you have people that have, used the drug and are now operating a vehicle, how do you penalize, even if it's legal? I mean, there still has to be some penalties for, just like with alcohol, for the use of marijuana. How would you even develop that system?
Well, how do you do it now? I mean, it's not legal to operate a vehicle in an impaired manner, whether you're impaired by opiates or prescription drugs or other prescription drugs or marijuana or alcohol. The idea is that there is no field test for other drugs. There's no breathalyzer for opiates, and yet they can be severely impair your driving ability. Actually, I understand that they have developed a field test for marijuana intoxication, which does not rely on the urinalysis, which could produce a positive result for 30 days, but give a much better indication of whether or not the person has recently used marijuana and should not be driving a car. But I think that the real solution to that is simply the field sobriety test. This is an issue that we have now. To determine whether a person is impaired and should not be driving, you have to look at the experience of the officer who's there involved in evaluating the person.
All right. Now, studies that I've read show that approximately, well, they say less than 5% of the individuals who are using medical marijuana are using it outside of the symptoms for which it was prescribed. And there is a school of thought that says with reduced restrictions on the use of medical marijuana in New Jersey and obviously the recreational use, that what you're going to have is an impact on adolescence. Okay, it's going to be something that is going to be more prevalent than alcohol, some will argue. And there's a school of thought and some research that shows that adolescents who are 14 years of age who consistently use marijuana are doing damage to their brain. Do you believe that the legalization for recreational purposes or the expanded medical use of marijuana is going to have an impact on adolescents? Because these are the people we're talking about who are going to be operating motor vehicles because they're not using their best judgment in general, and now they have access to marijuana. What do you think about that?
Well, we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it in the states where marijuana is legal right now for medical uses, and I think it's too early to make a determination about the effect of the legalization program on adolescents in Colorado and Washington State. We have not seen an increase in marijuana use among adolescents in the states that have medical marijuana programs. In fact, we've seen a significant decrease in most of those states. I'm not seeing it according to the research. And one of the things that medical marijuana does is it makes it less glamorous for teens to use it. When teens see cancer patients and AIDS patients and hospice patients using marijuana, it doesn't make it something that they want to do. It deglamorizes it and it makes it less attractive for them, I believe. And the other thing is that nobody wants adolescents to use marijuana inappropriately. Even people who support legalization. But we think that the current system is such a failure. I mean, the current system of prohibition that we live under now. Look at the availability for teens that we have now, Peter. The Monitoring the Future surveys have shown for the last 30 years in a row that over 80% of high school seniors say that marijuana is easy to get or fairly easy to get. The current system is simply not working, and the current system is doing a great deal of damage. When teens do use marijuana and they find out that the harms associated with marijuana have been greatly exaggerated, then what are they to believe? They don't believe, about the harms that they don't believe the education that people try to inform them about the harms associated with other more dangerous drugs.
Isn't that true though about
many? Problem.
Isn't that true though about many different drugs? For example, take anabolic steroids. I think that anabolic steroids are something that can be used safely. And it's the same argument, kids are going to get them in high school because they go to the local gym and they pick them up and they don't know what they're using. And if they were legalized, then you'd have safe, quality medications. So what's the difference between marijuana and anabolic steroids for use in sports?
I'm not that familiar with anabolic steroids, quite frankly. So I'm really not qualified to discuss, or even to compare anabolic steroids to marijuana, But I can say that it's. We have a choice, really, between making things making reasonable regulations and reasonable restrictions and making unreasonable restrictions, certainly on the use of marijuana that we're doing now, Peter. How can we, what sense does it make to say that minors shouldn't use marijuana if by the same token you say adults shouldn't use it either? What sense does it say you should not use marijuana in your car if at the same time you're saying you shouldn't use it outside your car? Just the prohibition doesn't make sense. The regulations are not reasonable. They're not something that Americans are willing to adhere to. We've made great strides in the reduction of cigarette smoking in America, and we've done it without arresting a single person for smoking a cigarette. We've done it simply through program of education about the very real dangers that are associated with tobacco use, and a system of taxation that supports those educational programs and also discourages teens from using it in that way. So, until we begin to really be honest with teens about drug use, you're not going to make any progress, and you can't hope to really have a serious impact on teen use of drugs in general.
Well, you mentioned something that's really, I think, relevant here, taxation. I mean, look at what Colorado brought in taxes in, a month and a half, 2 months worth of legalization of marijuana. So isn't it fair to say that at least to an extent some of the proponents driving this idea of medical marijuana, and I'm not talking about your organization, but others, don't they see this as a cash cow, as a business venture? There's going to be, obviously, facilities. There's going to be paraphernalia that needs to be produced. So aren't a lot of those industry types behind this push as well?
No, yes, I'm certain that there's there's a huge industry that is waiting to blossom, with marijuana legalization. And is in fact already, to some extent, having significant impacts on various economies. One of the economies we hope to have a negative impact on is the drug cartels. The illegal drug dealers. Why enrich illegal drug dealers? Why, through this system of prohibition, when you can be enriching our state treasuries and providing taxation to go to education and roads and senior citizens and every type of program that the state funds.
Yeah, but there has to be a limit on that argument, though, because you're not talking about introducing heroin, and I mean, because you look at South America, what drugs are we getting from them? I mean, look at the heroin epidemic in this country. So there's got to be limitations on that argument. You wouldn't want to say, let's enrich our state and our federal government and the taxes. Let's introduce heroin.
Well, it's a separate issue, and we're not talking about introducing, legalizing methamphetamine and cocaine and heroin. We're talking about 50% of the war on drugs. 50% is a war on marijuana. So by taking marijuana out of the equation, you are having a significant impact on both the illegal drug trade and on the ability of the state to produce, to fund very worthwhile projects. And of course there is a huge industry that's also, jobs and taxes and jobs producing paraphernalia, jobs testing marijuana. The marijuana industry is potentially a multi-billion-dollar industry that should be taxed and regulated appropriately here in the country rather than prohibited.
Now, as far as looking at the future, I mean, because it seems to me as though the trend will be, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or 2 years, I think we're going to slowly start seeing legalization and expanded use of marijuana just because that's the developing trend. So I don't think it can be necessarily stopped, even though there are proponents of it. But what sort of educational programs need to be in place, not just for adolescents, but for adults? Because even in Colorado, while it might be legal, you can still be fired by an employer. You can still be screened by an employer. So the fact that marijuana is illegal doesn't mean that if you come to work high that you're not going to lose your job. And are there enough educational programs out there right now? What needs to be developed if this becomes the trend?
Well, it certainly is the trend. If we look at who supports marijuana legalization, we see that my generation, the baby boomers, and Generation X, the people born between 65 and 80, are just over majority support, 52, 53%. But the millennial generation, those people born between 1981 and 1996, have almost 70% support for marijuana legalization. the only generation with a less than majority support is the silent generation, those people born between 1923 and 1945. So, you're certainly right when you say that marijuana legalization is almost an inevitability here in the United States, given the demographics of those who support it. And there are, an important number of educational programs that need to be brought out, and to explain, but some type of honest education, Peter, rather than the kind of government propaganda that we're getting now. What are the effects on the body? What are the expected effects? What are the potential side effects? The drowsiness, the easily distracted. What potential adverse effects are there from marijuana? The coordination difficulties, the difficulties associated with operating machinery, possible paranoia or anxiety or dysphoria, which is just an uncomfortable feeling. There's a rare panic reaction that's associated with marijuana, and it may precipitate a mental health crisis in people who are have that type of predisposition. So there are some legitimate concerns, but in order to get these legitimate concerns out, we have to get past this demonization of marijuana, where marijuana is associated with insanity and criminality and death. That the federal government's been talking about for so many years. Employment issues is a very real concern, as you say, that this happens today. It happens today even in medical states that have passed medical marijuana laws. Still patients who can test positive for marijuana on the job can be fired. We've seen this happen in Michigan. A person who was, employee of the month, he was injured in an unrelated accident. He had to go for a drug test, and he lost his job because he was a medical marijuana patient. So, it's not necessarily, it's certainly unfair, and I think that the courts really have to look at this issue, and either that or the laws have to be strengthened to give much greater employment protection for people who are using marijuana in medically, to protect them from losing their jobs the way they would be protected from using any medicine under a doctor's recommendation.
But do you think? I don't necessarily agree with that, because I don't think that that's necessarily fair to say to an employer, you must treat this employee different because they're using medical marijuana. It's not like it falls under, like in New Jersey, the law against discrimination or any of the ADA guidelines. The fact that they may be using medical marijuana, it doesn't seem right to force an employer to say, now I've got to make an exception because, you've got a condition that you're being treated for.
Really? It doesn't seem right to you? It certainly seems right to me. If a person is using medical marijuana because he has cancer, and should he be fired for that, Peter? Is that what you're saying?
Well, doesn't the employer have the right to fire someone? Let's say that the employer doesn't know. They know that the individual has cancer, but they don't know that they're using medical marijuana. And the job involves forklift operating or packing on a shipping line. And this individual, there's no dispute that the use of marijuana can lead to impairment, even if it's minor, the same way that alcohol consumption could.
Exactly. But, the way marijuana is used for chemotherapy, typically used for chemotherapy, is that a couple of puffs are taken by the patient before the chemotherapy, and then a couple of puffs are taken by the patient after the chemotherapy. And this controls the nausea and the vomiting that are associated with chemopherapy. So, this is not done on the job. And these effects of marijuana, especially when it's used by inhalation method, wears off in a couple of hours. So the next day when that person goes on a job, he's not impaired by the use of marijuana, although he would still test positive for the use of marijuana. So I think that that's an important distinction to make, that he is not impaired on the job, even though he tests positive on the job, and that that it is an outrage, in my opinion, that he should lose his job because he has cancer and he's using an appropriate medicine off the job that does not impair him on the job. It's an outrage that he should lose his job for that.
But also it's an outrage when you look at an employer who now has to have increased liability. We're going to open up a whole new insurance field because, when you have somebody who is operating a forklift, let's just stick with that example for a second, and there's a death or an accident or an injury, that's the number one question that's going to be asked at a deposition. Did you know that your employee was using medical marijuana? And, there's no we talked earlier about alcohol consumption, and you can have a level of alcohol use, and you can know when somebody was impaired on alcohol, but you don't have that same ability on marijuana. And so how should an employer be held liable when somebody's using medical marijuana? The employer doesn't know if that patient or that employee is going to be using it in the morning before they go to work, and you can't regulate that. So while it might be acceptable to allow medical marijuana as a therapeutic drug, it doesn't necessarily seem to suggest that employers have to, or can't fire employees because of that.
Well, but what's the situation now? I mean, you're more familiar with employment law in this area than I am, certainly. So, what's this? Let's forget about marijuana. Let's say, a pain medicine, opioids that are prescribed for cancer. What's the situation now? Can an employer fire a person who tests positive for an opioid? Who is not impaired on the job? I mean, obviously, if some you do not, we're all agreed that impairment in the employment area is inappropriate and should be dealt with severely, especially when in the example of a forklift operator or someone who is operating machinery or someone who can endanger other people or himself. But to me, marijuana is just another drug, and it should be treated as just another drug, and there should not be some marijuana exception because marijuana stays in the body and can be detected longer than most other drugs.
Well, the answer to your question, though, is yes. Right now, even in Colorado, if you are an employer and you have an anti-drug policy, regardless of whether or not that drug is being used for medical purposes, and the individual tests positive for that drug, they can be fired. And that's how it is across the country.
Oxycodone or some other drug that is a legitimate prescription written by a doctor, that person can be fired if they're So if you work for one of these companies, you can't get sick. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, but let's talk about recreational use versus medical use for a minute. Because if we were talking about the trend developing where we believe that marijuana is going to be legalized for recreational purposes, as in Colorado. Let's look at Colorado, for example. They have the legalization as a recreational use drug, yet an employer still maintains the right to say, if you test positive for a drug, and certainly we're not talking about antibiotics or other medications, but clearly, too, if you're an employer and you have an employee who's impaired because of the use of oxycodone, you're not going to want them engaged in the use of heavy equipment or that sort of thing. But if an employer has an anti-drug policy of banned substances, and they typically are not referring to things like oxycodone or Vicodin, but to drugs like marijuana and cocaine and that sort of thing, they can be fired.
Yes.
Now, you disagree with that.
Courts have. I disagree with it. The courts have agreed with it. The courts have said that they can, in fact, be fired, and they have, in fact, been fired. It seems to me that this is unfair to the people involved, especially if they're not impaired on the job. But it is an issue that I think needs further discussion and needs some type of other resolution to it. I think there's a fundamental unfairness in penalizing a person because they're sick and they're using a medicine that does not impair their performance on the job. But But anyway,
well, would you feel comfortable making a distinction between those individuals using medical marijuana versus those using recreational marijuana? Even though it's all legalized in our example, would you make a separate distinction for employers?
Well, yes, actually, I think that there should be a separate distinction. And the crux of the matter should be, whatever the drug use is, if the drug use impairs the person's ability on the job, then he deserves to be fired, I think, or sent to counseling, or at least, prior to, being fired, depending on the particular policy involved. But the real issue is it impairment on the job because of drug use, and what was the reason for that? So I think that there's an important distinction to be made between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. And part of the problem that you get into, as I said, is that the marijuana can be tested in the body for up to 30 days, can test positive in the body for up to 30 days, and so it doesn't necessarily really determine impairment on the job. I think that there needs to be better system for determining impairment.
All right, so that sounds to me as though not only is there a need for additional training, but there's going to be a need for additional legislation to clarify certain issues. I mean, this seems to open up a huge can of worms, not just simply the debate over whether or not it should be legalized. There's a lot of moving parts to this.
Yes, absolutely. So there are.
And what about I just want your thoughts on individuals who have predispositions to react in a particular way to marijuana, but they don't know it because they've never used it before.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the liability should be on, let's say, a legalized marijuana state where you have a non-governmental facility, a regular business, selling it, and they're selling it to an individual who has a predisposition, they don't know about it. It's not as though you're serving someone at a bar and you can see they're intoxicated and you say, all right, I'm going to put the brakes on and call you a cab. What do you think the liability should be on that store owner who sells marijuana, or do you think there should be no liability?
You mean like a predisposition to a mental illness, and this it kicks off a mental illness in someone who is predisposed to have that mental illness? Yeah,
or paranoia that leads to some sort of killing spree or whatever it might be in a unique circumstance.
Yeah, we haven't seen that kind of thing, but personally, I think that trying to legislate triggers for mental illness, is not a very practical endeavor. A trigger for a mental illness could be marijuana, it could be alcohol, it could be breaking up with a relationship, with a significant other. So, anything could really be a trigger for a schizophrenic break, perhaps. So, to try to legislate that, or to try to show some cause-effect relationship could be, extremely difficult and probably just
nearly
futile.
impossible. Yeah, but what about the liability on that store owner? The same way that you've got laws that say there's liability imputed to a bar owner who serves an excessive amount of alcohol, do you think that there should be a waiver that these store owners set forth with the purchase of marijuana in legalized states that says, hey, listen, we're not going to be held responsible if there's an issue that arises out of your use of marijuana? And do you think that the case law needs to support that so that people that are selling it legally are not being sued?
That's a very good question, Peter, and I'm just not a lawyer. I'm really not qualified to answer that, quite frankly. It's a good question. I really haven't considered that. The kind of liability that bar owners have, for serving an intoxicated person, should that kind of liability extend to the intoxication that's associated with marijuana? That it's a good question. Part of I think part of the distinction is that alcohol is consumed publicly in bars in throughout the country and in the states. So far, in Colorado at least, there has been a provision that there is no public consumption of marijuana. So you can't consume the marijuana in the place where you buy it. So I think that would probably decrease the liability of the person of the establishment that sold it. But like I said, it's really a difficult question for me to answer. So,
but what it really does open up, I think, is it opens up the idea that case law and laws in general are going to develop around this new area of potential liability. And I think that, even if we're proponents of medical marijuana, even if they're a proponent of recreational marijuana, I don't think it's as simple as, okay, let's pass a bill, it's legal, because it's going to be years of developing the legal trends that arise out of it. Who's liable, who's responsible, when can you sue? So it certainly isn't a quick and easy thing.
No, and Senator Scutari introduced a bill to legalize marijuana in New Jersey. Just a week ago today, he did this knowing that Governor Christie would veto any legalization bill in New Jersey, and yet he did it, I think, to start a dialogue about legalization in New Jersey, the pros and cons, what kind of unforeseen circumstances legalization might lead to, and to work out some of these issues. So it's not going to happen, I think, anytime too soon here in New Jersey. But I think that when it does happen, it will be a good thing, and there will certainly be problems associated with it. But far fewer problems, Peter, than are associated with our current situation.
Right.
We're talking about a prohibition that not only is ineffective, but is so damaging to our society. The legal problems, the laws against marijuana are the time in prison, 6 months in prison for possession of a single joint here in New Jersey. That's one thing, but there are civil penalties that are associated with a marijuana conviction that are absolutely devastating to a person's life. They can be thrown out of public housing. They can be barred from higher education. They can lose their parental rights. They can lose their driver's license. They can be barred from employment. The kind of issues that we face now with our current policy are so horrendous that the unintended consequences and the kind of mopping up that we need to do after marijuana is legalized will pale in comparison to the issues that we face now.
All right. Well, Ken, thank you very much for joining me today. If people want more information about you, what's your website, Ken?
Thank you, Peter. Yes, we are the Coalition for Medical Marijuana in New Jersey. That's www.cmmnj.org. And we're also very, very popular on Facebook at the Friends of the Coalition for Medical Marijuana in New Jersey. You can find up-to-the-minute things about what we're doing there. We have monthly meetings on the second Tuesday of every month at the Lawrence Township Library from 7 to 9 p.m. The public's invited, welcome to come, and there are a number of events that you can find on our website that we'll be involved in if you want to come out and meet us.
All right, that's great, Ken. We're going to have some questions that come out of this show, so perhaps we can have you on in the future to answer those questions. Again, thanks for being here today. I want to remind everybody to tune in this Thursday at 10 o'clock. We have former Wall Street journalist and reporter. She's the author of Haunted Empire, Apple After Steve Jobs. It's going to be very interesting. So tune in on Thursday. And if you have questions about this show, give us a call at 973-949-3770. Remember that there's power in understanding the law.